It's Thursday night, September the 8th, 1988. Barely 2 years since headlines around Australia told of the terrible rape and murder of Sydney nurse and beauty queen Anita Cobby. Now, just a few kilometres from the scene of that terrible crime, another young woman is about to be raped and murdered. And the news media will soon carry the incredible revelation that among those charged with the murder is a 14-year-old boy. The peaceful Riverina district in southern New South Wales is hundreds of kilometres and a world away from the mean streets of Sydney. It's on a farm here that Beverly Norton grows up in the 1950s. Bev, as she's known, is just 16 when she first meets young carpenter Kerry Balding.
Kerry, his grandmother and aunt lived next door in the house in between where my Auntie Lola lived, and there was their grandparents' house and then our new house.
Love slowly blossoms, and 5 years later they're married, just after Bev's 21st birthday. The couple buy a home in the regional city of Wagga Wagga, where Kerry starts a joinery business and where their first child, Carolyn, is born. Then, in 1967, comes their second daughter, Janine.
Always a bubbly little girl and stood up for herself well and truly as she was growing up, and she had a few little friends, not a lot, but a few little friends, and she was a loyal friend to anybody who made friends with her.
I remember in Canberra, she got stuck between two beds there once because she was always looking around, always crawling around. We used to go a lot away with Mum and Dad or Bev's ma, for weekends. And she was the villain with the joy of the family.
Her sister Gail follows 4 years later, and finally a son, David, is born when Janine is 10.
Many photographs in the backyard with our kids romping around, and blonde hair, always had a smile, and she grew into a very beautiful young lady.
She'd always be willing to help you out, if you wanted to do something, and she'd offer to do things, which was, a very nice attitude to have, She left school in year 10 after completing her school certificate, and she dearly wanted to go to Sydney, and her eldest sister was living in Sydney at the time, so we decided because her sister was in Sydney she could go too, but she had to have a job first.
Janine works as a bank clerk in the city, and she and her sister share the family's holiday flat at Cronulla, an Ocean Beach suburb on Sydney's southern edges. In 1987, she meets fireman Steve Moran, and in April 1988, they become engaged. The couple have been planning life after their wedding.
She was really looking forward to being a wife and a mother, yes, I'm sure she was. But she was very good with anyone that had little children. She had some friends that had little ones, and she used to love helping out there if she could. She was always very good with David too. She looked after him lots of times.
On Wednesday, 7th of September, 1988, Janine spends the night with her fiancé Steve at his Sutherland home. The next morning, instead of driving home to Cronulla, Janine makes the fateful decision to park at Sutherland railway station and take the train to her bank job in the city. Central Station is a bustling centre of activity for travellers and commuters. It also attracts homeless teenagers who sneak onto the trains to find a dry place to sleep. Some homeless juveniles are runaways escaping from dysfunctional families, while others are simply antisocial rebels who reject all authority. Many of them turn to crime, but no matter how serious their offences, society still holds out hope that they'll reform. To give them a second chance when they become adults, the law protects their identities. 3 of the kids featured in this story cannot be named and will be called simply M, W, and B. M is a 16-year-old runaway whose past crimes include arson, burglary, and car stealing. He's hanging around Central on Thursday, September the 8th, 1988, when he meets up with Stephen Wayne Jamison.
Alright. Yeah, alright. What are you looking at? What's your problem, mate? What are you looking at me for? Get lost. Keep walking, bastard. Four-eyed prick.
Jamison is 21 and is known as Shorty because of his stunted physique, his body having been damaged before birth by his mother's intake of alcohol.
Mate, let's get out of here before I do something drastic.
At the age of just 11, he runs away from home to live on the streets. He racks up an extensive criminal record, peppered with convictions for sexual assault, robbery, and malicious wounding.
Hey, Shorty. Hi, mate. How you going, bro? How you doing? I'm good, man. Been good, man. How you been? See ya. How you going, buddy? How you guys been?
Shorty and M are then joined by 15-year-old W, who's been a ward of the state since he was 5. He's chosen to live rough on the streets after repeatedly rejecting offers of a normal life in various foster homes. His police record already includes charges for stealing and sexual assault. At the moment, he's linked up with an intellectually retarded girl named Carol Ann Arrow.
Hey, Carol. Huh? Where you been?
Nowhere.
Huh? I saw you talking to that guy before.
Who's just arrived in Sydney after running away from her home in a country town.
Don't do that.
Huh? What's that? Seen another fella?
No.
That'll be right. Mucking around.
The last to join the group is B. He's a 14-year-old delinquent who's been living on the streets since he was 9.
What are you up to, mate, little fella?
Nothing really.
Yeah?
While that was the first time they'd all met, B and M had actually known each other for a couple of days. They'd met up on the streets.
No, what did I do?
It's essential to establish a place in the pecking order. Toughness equals survival.
You know how kids do, big noting each other. Maybe it's how blokes do, you know, saying, oh, I've done this, I've done that.
Oh, yeah, not bad.
But it's M who urges the group to step up to a new level of depravity when he suddenly issues a chilling dare.
You? Who gives a shit, mate? That's nothing. Okay, how about tonight we get some Sheila and we rape her? Yeah. It's all right, mate. It's not bad. You're not bad, mate. I'm up for that. You up for that, boys?
Shorty.
Yeah?
Shorty, man.
You up for that? All right, that's it. Let's do it, boys.
That afternoon, the gang rides a suburban train south to Sutherland.
And they put on such a show for the passengers on the train. They were just big noting each other and being incredibly rude and being loud and noisy. And Jamison picked up, he had a pornographic magazine and he was making lewd remarks to one of the passengers and really getting in her face.
Shorty Jamison's ugly behaviour on the train fixes him in the woman's memory, and she'll later be able to clearly identify him. Everyone in the carriage is relieved when the gang finally gets off at Sutherland Station. In the next hours, 2 young women will face their destiny. One has a miraculous escape, while the other falls victim to a senseless and barbaric attack. It's the evening of Thursday, September 8th, 1988, and a gang of young thugs is loitering in the car park at Sutherland Railway Station in southern Sydney. 19-year-old laboratory technician Christine Mobley leaves the station on her way home.
When I started to walk towards my car was the first car lined up along the car park. As I walked towards my car, I noticed there was this group of youths. So I thought, this looks a bit suspicious. I mean, not that I thought anything was going to happen, but, when you get a group of kids, sometimes you just feel a bit threatened, I suppose. I sort of got my keys at the ready thinking, if something does happen, I can get in my car quickly.
Check her out. What do you reckon?
I quickly got into my car and he walked up to my window and said,
Hey, you got the time?
Yeah, it's 5:15.
You got any cigarettes?
No, sorry, I don't smoke.
You got any money?
And there was a flick knife held here. And I just went, oh my God. And
Stupid slag.
Distressed and shaking, Christine drives home and immediately reports the incident to her boyfriend Barry. Even though he's laid up with a broken leg, they decide to go straight to the police. The officer on duty at Sutherland Police Station takes down the details of the incident, but it's not considered serious enough to send a patrol car. Janine Balding has finished work on time and caught her usual train, arriving at Sutherland at about 6 p.m. She's walking down the slope towards the car when she's spotted by the gang.
Hey!
Christine and Barry are on their way home from the police station and they decide to check if the gang is still harassing people. They see them standing next to a young woman who's obviously being intimidated. With Barry's broken leg, there's not much that they can do to help, but at least now they've got something more definite to tell the police.
Have you got any cigarettes?
No, sorry.
You got any money?
Not for you.
M pulls out a knife and threatens to cut her face if she doesn't do as she's told. Just then, the alarm sounds and M grabs her keys.
I ran inside, basically barging past these people. I said, look, there's a woman there, the same youths are there, you've got to get down there.
The police, unfortunately, went to the wrong car park. They went to the car park on the other side of the railway line.
There's a lot of car parks at Sutherland Station, as people who live down there know, but they did not go to where Christine had seen Janine, and I still feel, it was a mistake on their part.
The police then drive around to the other car park, but they see nothing suspicious. There's no gang to be seen and nothing to indicate a young woman has been abducted. The following morning, a police patrol on the F4 freeway stops to investigate an abandoned car. Inside, they find some underwear and not far away, a handbag.
And Detective Sergeant Dick Kornacki arrived, and when he had a look at it, he organised a little search around the area, and it was at that point that they start finding other things belonging to Janine Balding.
The police then find that Janine has not arrived at work and her fiancé Steve hasn't seen her since the previous evening. Her sister Carolyn, who'd left late that night to sleep at her boyfriend's place, thought Janine was asleep in her room. A check at the Cronulla flat confirms she's not been home. The police then ring Janine's family in Wagga Wagga.
And they said, we found Janine's car. I said, oh, I didn't know it was missing. But they said, we can't find Janine. I said, oh, she's got to be around somewhere. They said the car was found at Penrith. As soon as they said that, the penny dropped. Janine wouldn't be out there. She didn't go out like that.
He come back, walked through the doorway, and I knew by the look on his face something was wrong. I could just tell, the look on his face.
For Bev, time stands still as the police keep calling with an update every 10 or 15 minutes.
They were on the phone constantly talking to us and telling us what was going on all the time.
The search is being coordinated by Detective Sergeant Kevin Rowie, the officer who led the inquiry into the Anita Cobby murder. The Cobham Youth Refuge in Sydney's west is one of many centres scattered around Sydney providing basic help for homeless teenagers. It's there on the afternoon after Janine's abduction that M and B confess to a social worker that they've stolen a car. The police are called, and during questioning, the boys suddenly produce a yellow-handled knife.
And then they started to say, we know about this young girl that's been abducted and killed. We know we can help you out with it. So now they're trying to, I'd imagine, because they've been arrested with a stolen car, trying to look for some type of assistance to try and help themselves out, and then volunteered a story.
While I spoke to him, he told me that he wasn't sure whether she was dead, whether Janine was dead. And the first duty of mine is the preservation of life. And I asked him if he'd take me to the site where this happened. And he then took us to the dam at Minchinbury and took us right out where Janine was floating in the dam. That was around midnight.
It's around midnight when M and B lead two police officers to a dam in a paddock beside the freeway at Minchinbury in Sydney's west.
You just picture the scene in a quite darkened park area off the road, off the M4 freeway. Here's his dam, and all of a sudden here's Janine's body floating in the water.
At 3:45 a.m, Detective Rowie calls Bev and Kerry and gently breaks the terrible news.
It was just such a dreadful shock to us. And of course I wanted to go and see her, make sure it was her. It was the first thing I wanted to do. I thought, I said to Kerry, we've got to go down to see her, make sure it is her.
It's to be the start of a long and difficult few years that'll see this gentle countrywoman draw on all her strength as she pursues justice for her daughter.
I think mothers are really tough. I think mothers are often tougher than fathers. I think Bev was just a lovely country lady. They were just a lovely country family. They'd never been in trouble with the police. I don't even think they'd had a parking ticket before. And suddenly they're thrust into the worst scenario that you could possibly imagine. And the way they dealt with it all was such a strength.
Janine's body is taken to a nearby morgue where forensic pathologist Peter Ellis performs an examination.
It was my opinion that she died as a result of drowning, and that was on the basis of the presence of dirty, mucky fluid both in the mouth and in the throat and deeper down in the lungs. It was evident that she had inhaled dirty fluid, which matched the type of fluid that was in the dam in which she was found.
They took us out there. They showed us a fence that they threw Janine over. That's where she broke her wrist, I think it was. They broke her wrist when they threw her over the fence there.
Got him, mate? Yep. All right. 1, 2, 3.
Bev and Kerry Balding formally identified their daughter's body. In their grief, they have the support of family and friends, and at least one couple who understand their pain. Grace and Gary Lynch, the parents of murdered nurse Anita Cobby, contact them, offering comfort and advice.
You know, you knew that they knew the pain that you were feeling, whereas to deal with anyone else, to say, you know, I'm sorry and I know how you feel, they have no idea how you feel. If you haven't felt that pain yourself, you just do not know. It's just something that's just incredible.
The Lynches also pass on some tips on how to cope with the complex and at times overwhelming justice system.
I mean, I'd never been inside a court in my life, and neither had Kerry. And you know, for us it was a big thing to go inside this court, and they sort of, you know, guided us along the way on quite a few aspects of what would happen. And I think it was great, Gary rather, that gave me courage to speak up, because I always thought he spoke up so beautifully for Anita. And that was one of the reasons I thought, well, if he can do that, I can do it too. And I have.
After guiding the police to the murder scene, M and B are arrested. They then implicate W and Carol Ann Arrow, who are located soon afterwards.
18-year-old Carol Arrow and a 15-year-old boy were arrested last night, joining 3 other teenagers charged over the sex murder of Janine Balding.
A national manhunt then locates Jamison on the Gold Coast.
The 22-year-old was at the Southport Salvation Army hostel for a week before being kicked out for drunkenness. Only minutes after he left, one of the hostel's officers heard a description on the radio and rang police, who arrested Jamison on Southport Beach.
Jamison immediately confesses to having been present, but denies he took part in the killing. In fact, each gang member denies killing Janine, and they all give a different account of what happened. All 5 are charged with theft, abduction, sexual assault, and murder. The investigation into the murder will prove to be groundbreaking. It'll be one of the first times a court will hear evidence of DNA testing placing a suspect at a crime scene. And the courtroom will also be where Bev Balding finally hears the full details of her daughter's terrible ordeal.
Shut up! Put your hands up! Shut up, you bitch! Shut up, mate!
The gang that abducted Janine Balding has been arrested. Police now set about gathering witness statements and collating the evidence the prosecution will need to prove the charges of rape and murder. One challenge is to unravel the truth from all the lies that are being told.
In their first statements, all of the kids told the truth about what happened, but they all blamed it on someone called Scott Aegis, who was another fellow street kid. But the police discovered that Scott Aegis, not only was he not there, but he had a perfect alibi because he was with another youth worker at the time.
The version they were giving was they were introducing all these other people, and they were effectively talking in the third person. So in other words, what they were describing is what they did, and yet they were putting other people's names to it. So they're trying to really distance them from it.
Christine Mobley attends a police lineup and identifies M as one of the youths who accosted her at the car park and whom she later saw intimidating Janine.
At the time?
And the police officer kept saying to me, make sure you look up and down the line, because he knew every time I go 1 or 2 and I go back, 1 or 2 and I go back to him. I knew as soon as I walked into that room who it was.
This is also the era of early DNA technology. Samples are given by the accused and sent to the UK for analysis. The results clearly indicate that B had sexually assaulted Janine.
So that really tied him into the case, and even though he still had a litany of other lies where he continued to maintain that all these other people, and he had nothing to do with it, and yet here we are, we've got DNA that's tied him into this proof.
Police also locate the owner of an army disposal store, who clearly remembers M and B and confirms she sold them the yellow-handled knife. A clear set of W's fingerprints are found on the steering wheel of Janine's car. A check of bank records shows Janine's bank card was used at an automatic teller machine in Mount Druitt, near Minchinbury, after the murder. A man who knew M well then comes forward and tells police he spoke to him and saw the gang at the Mount Druitt shops.
Their clothes were absolutely filthy. A lot of them had mud on their hands, some had it on their face. One guy His hair was all matted and grubby looking. His face was grubby. His feet, their feet were muddy as well, because I saw them walk into a shop and buy thongs. They had mud on between their toes. They were absolutely filthy.
Detectives learned that W gave Janine's watch to Carol Ann. A dealer in jewellery then appears with one of Janine's rings.
M went to a phone box and he rang a man who he only knew as someone called Goldfinger, and he offered to sell Janine's jewellery that they'd stolen, including her rings, to him.
He told him that on the night that he saw him, when he sold him the ring, that he had mud on his legs and on his trousers, and it was still damp mud. It wasn't dry.
Months later, when all the evidence has been compiled, the committal hearing gets underway. Bev makes up her mind that she's going to attend every day of the court proceedings.
I was determined I'd go. I wanted to know what happened, because Janine was the type of person that would come home and tell me everything that happened to her in her day-to-day life. And that was one of the reasons why I felt, no, I've got to know everything that happened, no matter how gruesome, I need to know.
At the committal hearing, she and Kerry first get to see those accused of their daughter's murder.
I'm not shitting you, mate. You know me.
I think my first initial thought was how young they were. I was just shocked to think that young kids that age could do what they did to Janine. I just could not believe, that young boys would be doing the things that they did to her.
The charges of abduction, theft, sexual assault and murder are read out. The prosecution then begins to present the evidence. Now, for the first time, Beverly and the rest of Australia hear the full details of Janine's ordeal. As soon as Christine Mobley and her fiancé drive off to tell police they've seen a woman being harassed, the gang quickly forces Janine into the back seat of the car.
Get out the door! Shut up, bitch! Open the door, baby! Open the door! Come on, mate. Let's get us out of here. Let's go. Drive.
W takes the wheel and they drive off. As they head west across the city to the outer western suburbs, the gang begins a wild and sustained sex attack.
Shut up!
The distance from Sutherland to Minchinbury is some distance from the southern suburbs to the western suburbs of Sydney. It could have been 40 minutes to an hour.
Shut up!
She was screaming, she was crying, she was begging them to leave her alone.
Get up! Shut up!
In the back seat of the car, she was raped by M, she was raped by B.
You can only imagine the terror that she went through. She's in the back seat of this car being sexually assaulted by at least 3 of the men in the back seat of the car. There's a young girl sitting in the front passenger seat of the car.
And it was incredible that a young woman could sit in the front of the car and allow that to go on in the back seat.
Come on, boys, give it to her good.
Somewhere along the way, in the midst of all her suffering, comes the most terrifying moment of all, the realisation that she's going to be killed. It comes in the form of a simple, cold observation by one of the gang.
You know what, boys? Thanks a nice night for a murder. Yeah. It's a great night for a murder.
They're on the F4 freeway and passing open land at Minchinbury when W pulls the car over.
Having fun, eh? Grab a leg! Grab a leg, mate! Yeah, grab it! Let me go!
And then once she was taken to the scene in the darkness, to be taken behind the car, and again the sexual act continued behind the car.
Shut your bloody mouth! You've been a nuisance the whole time! Shut up! Damn it!
Just one of sheer terror. Absolute terror.
That's right, mate. Come on, quick, quick. Come on.
Then they've tied her up into the fetal position, dragged her over a fence, and taken her through some scrub to where this dam was.
Get her over, get her over! All right, 1, 2, 3.
And then at least 2 of them, I'd say, has entered the dam with her.
Get her out, get her out. Finish her off, mate! Bloody finish her off! I don't want to hear another word out of her!
When we first heard that she'd been drowned in a dam, you think of a big dam, a deep dam. But in fact, it wasn't much deeper than a deep pool.
Yeah? She done, mate?
And they pushed her face down into the weeds, into the mud at the bottom of the dam. And her hand was clutching at a piece of weed.
As the full horror of the attack unfolds in court, the gang still shows absolutely no remorse.
Sitting up, turning around, jeering and laughing at us, the parents, we were sitting there closely, and actually it was absolutely disgusting. It sickened me.
After the murder, the gang removes Janine's jewellery and takes a bank card from her bag along with the PIN that she'd written on a piece of paper. They pile into the car and drive off, but after a few kilometres it breaks down. Leaving it on the side of the freeway, they walk the rest of the way into suburban Mount Druitt. After withdrawing money from her bank account and selling one of her rings, they take a train into the centre of the city, where they split up. M and B then confess their crime to another street kid.
B and M made their way into Hyde Park, which is another place where they used to sleep at night, where they met up with a girl they knew, Elizabeth, where they boasted to her, hey, you know, we've done a really big crime.
M and B sleep for a while before leaving Elizabeth and boarding a train north to the Central Coast. Alighting at Gosford, they throw Janine's banking cards into some scrub. They then steal a car and drive to the Cobham Youth Centre in Western Sydney, and the police are called. The evidence against the gang is clear, and all 5 are committed to stand trial. Some months later, the trial is well underway when the gang suddenly claims their accomplice was not Shorty Jamieson, but another street kid named Shorty Wells. It's enough to have the trial aborted, as the judge orders police to track down Shorty Wells. For Bev Balding, the mistrial is yet another mystery in a perplexing legal system. The first trial of the gang accused of raping and murdering Janine Balding has been aborted. The gang has now blamed another street kid named Shorty Wells, and police must track him down.
The extraordinary claim comes after 3 weeks of evidence, and despite the fact that the 3 young men have been sitting together in the dock every day.
We feel very much for the Balding family, and they're going to be absolutely horrified.
The whole thing is a shamuscle.
Bev Balding, still struggling with her grief, must wait months before another trial. While she's been spending most weekdays attending all the court sessions in Sydney, her 10-year-old son David has stayed at home with Kerry.
And they all just had to look after themselves while she was here, looking after Janine as she saw it. And young David was so hurt. I think he was really hurt by what had happened to his sister and what had happened, how the whole legal system had dealt with it. And terrified at night, he couldn't sleep with the window open.
No, it's been hard. It's been really hard. No one, you're 10 years old and you don't really understand what's going on.
Well, we had friends around. They were a big help. There was mother, stepfather. My mum was in Sydney at the time. We just had to keep on going. That's all we could do, nothing else. Step up a lift here for Gail and David, but that's all I could do. Probably that's why I spend so much time at work.
Little children that must be raised, you can't neglect them, but of course to do all those things at the one time You could imagine the enormous pressure that it placed on him. But they were still able to do it, and with a great deal of determination.
Before a second trial can be held, the murder charges against W are dropped. The prosecution accepts that he'd stayed in the car with Carol Ann Arrow when Janine was killed. He pleads guilty to rape, abduction and theft, and is sentenced to 10 years jail. The charges against Carol Ann Arrow are dropped because of her serious intellectual handicaps. Police track down Shorty Wells, and he's one of the first to give evidence when the second trial begins in May 1990.
They discovered that Wells had a lot of mental problems. He was a self-confessed devil worshipper who thought the devil sat on one of his shoulders and spoke to him.
While Wells's involvement is obviously a lie, Shorty Jamison's presence at the murder is established by testimony from 3 separate witnesses. Matt Simmons gives evidence at the trial, stating that he clearly remembers seeing Jamison with M at Mount Druitt on the night of the murder.
We had to go for a retrial because the little animal-looking bloke said it wasn't him, but it was definitely him. Nobody else looks like that.
Another witness is the woman who was confronted by Jamison on the train to Sutherland.
And then she picked him out in a photograph and said, that was the guy that I saw on the train. So that ties him in there with B and all the others on that train as well.
Top that easy.
There's also the testimony that Jamison bragged about the murder to one of his prison cellmates.
This prisoner came forward and said that he had nothing to hide, he was dying and he wanted to get it out of his system, and he said that Jamison did say that he killed Janine and he would do it again.
Next, the defence has psychologists testify that the gang is intellectually disabled, including M, who some detectives believe was the gang leader.
Gives a shit, mate. That's nothing.
Did an IQ test early and came in with low scores. And the psychologist that did it said that they could only vary the points by 5. And before sentencing, M, through his barrister, he asked to do another IQ test, and it came in well above average. So the 5 points went out the window by at least 40 points.
After a 4-week trial, the jury retires to consider its verdict, and even now, the gang shows no remorse.
They were just laughing and joking all the way through. They were giggling. They were making signs across to the press benches. Some of the journalists made signs back to them saying, "You're going down." This is when the jury wasn't in.
The courtroom erupts when Shorty Jamison, M and B are all found guilty of abduction, sexual assault, robbery and murder.
Justice Newman told the court that the murder of Janine Balding was so grave that the 3 prisoners, despite their age, should never be released from jail.
What do you think they deserve?
Capital punishment, naturally.
They're lucky that we don't live in a country where there is capital punishment. They're lucky.
I hope they're never released, and I hope they suffer the hell they put Janine through. What do I hope they suffer?
I just got his Father's Day card for 1988 from Janine.
To go through all these court hearings and then to finally hear the jury come back and have a guilty verdict, in a way, somehow justifies all the hard work that went into this case. It was very, very difficult investigation on many levels.
In sentencing all 3 to life, Justice Newman declares it to be one of the most barbaric murders ever committed in New South Wales. He recommends that they're never to be released. Various appeals by Jamison, M and B are all refused, and Jamison is denied special leave to appeal to the High Court. Throughout the long appeal processes, Bev Balding again attends every hearing. Then, Years later, it appears a legal loophole might see them released. But special legislation is passed to make sure all three, and others like them, spend the rest of their lives in jail.
And if you ever do get out, there's nowhere you can hide. Because we'll find you.
Detectives went bent over backwards for us. Every little item that come up, they told us, they rang us and told us.
Yes, the homicide police were wonderful. You know, we've virtually made friends with some of them today that we still receive Christmas cards from, and the odd phone call from time to time, and they've been really wonderful. They were wonderful at the time. They were very kind and good to us and helped us out as best they could at the court, and you know, that was a great support.
As a young detective working on this case, I was very fortunate to be in the presence of very experienced detectives, and it was a great learning experience for me, and lots of things that were told of me, and I watched and as they worked. You know, the guys of the vintage and the colour of Graham Rosetta, Kevin Rowie, John Carroll, Warwick Laney, Tom Sharp. These are all legendary detectives that have been around for a lot of years.
While three of the gang were jailed for life, W served just 7 years of his 10-year sentence before being released on parole in 1996. He then robbed, raped, or sexually assaulted at least 4 other women over the next 2 years. All the attacks occurred while he was either on parole or free on bail.
I think he was a really good liar. He'd been in trouble since he was a child. I mean, we get told about his troubled childhood, but how many people do you know that have a troubled childhood and live a normal, happy, healthy life and don't commit crime? This guy is bad to the core.
And you look at them as kids because of their age, but they're cunning, rat cunning. They play the system, they know the system. Play it for what it can be in court.
She's a feisty one, boys. A real catch.
W is now serving out sentences that total 19 years. He'll be eligible for release on parole again in 2017. Meanwhile, the emotional fallout from the case is unending. Christine Moberly will forever wonder if there was something more she could have done.
Hey, you got the time?
Yeah, it should be about 6 o'clock.
But it's just that those guys may be in jail, but we're the ones with the life sentence, not them. I mean, it wasn't my daughter. I didn't know Janine. And what I feel is probably nothing compared to Mr. and Mrs. Balding and the family, but it's very hard to deal with. Very hard.
Of course, it made a big difference to Christine's life. I feel very sad and sorry for Christine in the circumstances. You know, she possibly feels that she didn't do enough, but as far as I'm concerned, she did all she could do.
Among the Balding family and the many other relatives and friends who knew and loved Janine, there is no forgiveness for the unrepentant killers.
They took Janine's life for no reason whatever. I mean, she didn't know them. She was a stranger to them, and they just sort of came into her life in that sort of second of time, and then committed all the cruel deeds that they committed on her, and then decided she might tell someone they'd get rid of her.
Shut up! Please don't! Shut up!
And because it wasn't just a quick death, I mean, she would have died a slow death for what they did to her.
You're gonna like it.
To think that, you know, how terrified she must have been that night. I cannot, for the life of me, and never ever will forgive them for what they did.